Hello and welcome to Maldorma TV. I'm Tobias Holver and this is episode 24.
And I'm Magnus Alber. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the spiritual practice self-inquiry, which were made famous by the Indian saint Ramana Maharshi.
Ramana Maharshi is considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, saint that has lived, at least in modern times.
Yeah.
And his teachings are available all over the world. And the main message from his teaching is to inquiry of who am I?
Yeah, he made spiritual practice very simple and went directly to the source. He always said, examine who you are, who have all the questions.
Yeah, I think if you read the book True Happiness,
Yeah.
I remember reading that. And when you go through all the questions that all the devotees have, he always goes back to the same inquiry, the same answer, like going back to the question of who am I, investigates who has the question.
Find out who's asking.
Yeah, and I think it's a very powerful technique and amazing.
And Ramana said that it's the most direct technique to get to self-realization or enlightenment, the fastest way, but also quite a difficult way in many ways. The technique in itself is easy, but it's actually quite hard to do in a way.
Yeah, I think once you start practicing self-inquiry, you kind of notice how hard it actually is.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds easy enough, and you can have like being able to do the self-inquiry in like small seconds, but to hold on to that, the witness and of the self-inquiry, that's something that requires a long time of practice.
Yeah. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to do this technique and give a few tips and hints, and also talk about about Ramana and also some other spiritual teachers that have talked about this technique.
Yeah, and I think we begin with his basically Ramana's story, because it all started from when he was young. I think around in his teenage years or something like that, when he had his great awakening.
Yeah. And this spiritual technique of self-inquiry, he didn't invent it, but he did make it world famous, basically. And Ramana is a very special Indian saint because he had this spontaneous awakening when he was, I think it was 16 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
And one day he had this fear of death just coming over him and took him by surprise, basically. And he actually thought that he was going to die for no reason, really. He just
there was no problem with his body. He didn't have any sickness or anything. It was just this sudden fear of death came over him.
Yeah, and he lay down on the floor in the house, and he kind of started to think, who is it that dies? Is it the body? And I think he pretended to go into dying. Did he hold his breath?
Yeah, he held his breath and he made his body like stiff, as if
like
it
a
has.
corpse.
Yeah, exactly. So like, okay, the body is dead. What's left?
Yeah.
I think that was pretty much it. And
Yeah.
from that inquiry, he had an experience of the self that never left him.
And with the self, we're talking about who is experiencing the body and who is witnessing all the feelings, thoughts, sensations. Because I think we have to start there, actually, because most people identify themselves with a body, but the body is only an experience. But who is experiencing the experience of the body? Because if you look at your body, you will notice that you have thoughts, feelings, and sensations. But there's someone watching all of these things going on, and who is that? It's not sure that it's not proven that it's actually the body experience itself, because when you look at it, it seems like you are some kind of witness or consciousness experiencing your body. But it's possible that you're not your body, actually. And this technique and what Ramana Maharshi experienced was that there's actually this self, as he called it, that is not the body, but is experiencing the body.
Yeah, and this technique has also been like taught by Nisargadatta Maharaj, who also had a similar approach to it.
Yeah.
That you are the witness. You are that is consciousness, just witnessing everything, and you should try to go back into that 24/7, basically.
Yeah, I think he had a guru who told him to do a technique of self-inquiry, even though I don't think he used that word. But self-inquiry is examining who you are, who is this witness, and you go back to self-examination.
Yeah.
And Nisargadatta, I think he did this practice very intensely for about 3 years, and then he had a realization of what the self is.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it sounds, as you said before, it's easy, it's simple, it's very simple. And you can do this inquiry like every day, every hour of the day.
Yeah.
You can have it like you're working or you're doing some task. You can always like, who is doing this task? Who is thinking about this? Like always bringing your back to the self.
Yeah.
But I find it's also very hard to always have that presence, or like being that aware that, all right, now I need to catch myself.
Yeah.
Now I'm in a thought pattern. Now I'm being too emotional. I'm in the emotions.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's what comes with the practice.
Yeah.
You're lifting your awareness of and finding yourself more and more for each time.
But we do find this, both you and I use this practice as a spiritual practice, and it's one of my main practices, because it's really effective. And self-inquiry is, as we said, self-examination. You turn your attention towards yourself, towards the witness. Who am I? And you stay there. And one of the great experts on Ramana Maharshi, David Godman, who have written several books about him and worked at Ramana Ashram in India, said that I listened to an interview with him or a YouTube video that he has on his channel, where he said that Ramana often spoke about 2 different ways to do self-inquiry. And the most common one, and that mostly beginners start with, is asking the question silently as a thought, who am I? And then just sit. And as soon as a thought arises, you ask, who is thinking this?
Because I think that can be a mistake that people do, that they try to use the intellect to answer the question. You ask yourself, who am I? And then you try to find, you start adding like, I'm not my body. You start thinking about, I'm not my body. You start thinking, I'm not this, I'm not that.
Yeah.
Then you're not really doing it correctly. Then you're still stuck in the thoughts.
So the technique is actually to ask yourself, who am I? And then just sit in the silence that comes afterwards. And abide in the self that you already are, basically. But you the question, who am I, will automatically turn your attention towards yourself, the experience of yourself, and sit in that experience. But as soon as you drift away in thoughts, you ask again, who is thinking or who is doing whatever, and then you turn your attention back to yourself. Okay, it's me. Then who am I? So that's the main technique. Who am I? You sit. After a while, you start thinking about what you're going to eat, and you ask, who is thinking these thoughts? I am. Okay, who am I? And back to I. Back to I am. And you do this. And that's the basic technique. But David Godman talked about in his video that Ramana often taught this technique like this to beginners, but after a while, when you learn this, you can actually skip the question of who am I and just go directly to the awareness of yourself and abide in yourself. And I think that's the technique that Nisargadatta used. You just sit and turn your attention towards your awareness of yourself and sit there. So the question is not really needed, except perhaps in the beginning to learn how to focus on yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful technique. And also a little bit about the story of Ramana. When he had this awakening, he went back to Arunachala and he stayed there for the rest of his life. And one thing that was interesting was that he had no guru. At
Yeah.
least that's what he said. He had no guru.
Yeah.
Or Arunachala, the mountain,
Yeah.
manifestation of Shiva, was for him the only guru
Yeah.
they ever had.
And his awakening was a spontaneous one. He didn't do any
Yeah.
spiritual practice at all.
There's a lot of discussions and arguments if he did had a guru or not. There's I don't know the answer to that, but
He never
apparently
mentioned one, anyways.
no. And what I found interesting with him as well is when you look at the result of all the people who stayed with him.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you start to examining all the people around him, there's quite a lot of them who was able to find the self with
that became
this
enlightened.
technique. There's Anamali Swami, there's Robert Adams,
Papaji.
Papaji, of course, is I think those are the most famous ones.
And and a bunch of others as well that are not that famous and that chose not to live in the public eye, so to speak.
And I think for a Westerner, if you're watching this as a Westerner, one source of information, if you want to know more about self-inquiry, is looking at the work of Robert Adams.
Yeah.
Because I think he is able to explain it in a more understandable and perhaps a more modern Western way than perhaps Ramana was able to.
Yeah. And he was this American guru that went as a young, I think it was like 17, 18 when he went to India and met Ramana Maharshi and became enlightened basically, and then came back to America and had a small following, and he's becoming more and more famous just in recent years, I think.
Yeah, he held satsangs when he was alive, and those are available still as recordings, and I think they are, like as you said, more popular now than when he was alive. That perhaps the same goes for Ramana, with his teachings. And one thing that Robert also, and I think this came from Ramana as well, is one technique that Robert talked about in a video clip that I watched was that you should try to find yourself in the gap.
Yeah.
Like between the silence between the thoughts.
Yeah.
And he specifically said that it's great to do this directly in the morning.
Yeah.
That when you wake up, if you can train yourself to have awareness, like, okay, now I'm awake. Before you start thinking like, okay, now I need to go up and start brushing my teeth, taking a shower, get ready to work. Find yourself before that those thoughts occur. Find yourself in the gap. There you will be like in the self. You will be self-realized.
I think we need to explain a little of the theory behind self-inquiry as well, so everyone understands what we're talking about.
Yeah.
What Ramana said was basically that the feeling and the idea of an I is actually an illusion. That we think that we are a separate being, and when we turn our attention towards ourself, because our mind always are focused on outer experience, on objects, and when you force it to turn inwards to yourself, it will eventually collapse, because the I doesn't really exist as we think it does, the separate I, and the separate I is actually dependent upon identification with outer objects. That's what's keeping it alive, the illusion alive. And when you turn your attention toward yourself and hold it, and this requires some practice, of course, because the mind will always turn outwards by habit. But when you learn how to focus on the I, it will eventually collapse, because it cannot sustain itself by itself, because it really doesn't exist without the outer world. So so you hold your attention to the I thought, as Ramana said, and it will collapse into the true self, which is oneness, where you will understand who you really are.
Yeah, and I think when you try to do this practice, it's much easier if you do it during like silent meditation.
Yeah.
I mentioned before that you can do it whenever, but I think that requires a really big effort.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do that, to catch yourself like while you're working or while you're doing all these worldly tasks. Because one thing that happens when you start to meditate, once you close down, once you go silent, and once you go into darkness
Yeah.
is that you will find that your mind will start becoming more and more active in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it will try everything in order to try to pull you out of something to react to.
Mhm.
Because when you sit in meditation and just silence and darkness, the mind does not have anything um, to react on anymore.
Yeah.
So it starts to bring up all memories, everything,
Yeah.
just to pull you out. Like,
Yeah.
take me away from here. I want to be gone. Like, what's this place? I can't react to anything.
Yeah.
So you just push through that and stay with the witness.
Yeah.
Just watch the thoughts go by.
Yeah.
Then you can eventually the thoughts will subside.
Yeah. And what makes this technique simple yet very hard to actually do is holding the self, the tension towards yourself, because it's quite different from all other techniques of meditation, actually. Because if you take the classical meditation technique of focus on the breath, you're actually focusing on an experience outside of yourself, or you're doing a mantra or looking at a candle or whatever. You're always pointing your attention outwards toward an object of some sort. But in self-inquiry, you use no outer object as an anchor to put your attention on, but you put it on yourself. But when you do that, you will notice that finding the self, finding the I, is quite slippery because it's not really there, is it? It's not an object, because I had a real problem with self-inquiry for a long time, and I did it in the wrong way for actually many years before I had this realization, okay, this is how you actually do it. And I had read all the books, well, not all the books, but I had read several books on self-inquiry and listened to videos, and I had an email conversation with David Godman, this expert of Ramana, before I actually found how to have attention on the self, on the I thought.
Yeah.
Because what I noticed was, I was finished the story, was that what I usually did in the beginning was that I had my attention towards the sensation of the body, like my body is. And you have this feeling of that your body is there, and that's where I had my focus, but it wasn't really the sensation of I. It was I had my focus on my body, basically, because that's what my mind identify as I. And yeah, did you want to?
No.
So I had this experience some time ago where I was doing self-inquiry, and I was trying to sit with my attention on the I, but it was like it was always changing the sensations of myself. You know, your body and your sensation, there is thoughts, feelings, sensation from the skin, the muscles, but it's always changing, and I couldn't really hold on to anything because the experience is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And I thought that this can't be it. I'm doing this wrong.
Yeah, and it's also a bit of a trap once you go into the inquiry and things start to happening.
Yeah.
Now I'm feeling this, and it must be this,
Yeah.
and you lose it.
Because that's experiences.
Yeah.
It's not the experiencer.
Yeah.
And it's so easy. The mind is, by habit, will always go towards experiences and not stay in itself.
Yeah.
And what happened to me one time while doing this was that I had this recognition that, okay, what's always been here since I was a child? I mean, my body is completely different. Feelings have come and gone. Experiences have come and gone. Thoughts have come and gone. But there has been something always there, and that's the awareness of I. And the awareness of I is not actually a feeling. Because feelings come and go. I can feel like this and can feel like that, but the awareness is always there. And it's never changing. It's constant. So when seeking for the I sensation, the awareness of I, try to identify what is the constant that's always been here in every experience since you were a child. It's you, the awareness of yourself. And what is that? It's really just an awareness of being alive. It's not a sensation in the body, it's not a thought, it's just I. Right? And it's so easy once you have seen it, once you have recognized it, that yeah, it's the most familiar experience that you have. It's always been there, and it's never been. It's never changed. The I that you experienced when we were 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, and today or just a minute ago, have always been exactly the same. And it's never taken. None of your illnesses or anxiety have ever hurt it in any way. It's always been exactly the same, untouched by your experiences.
No attributes to it. Like you can't add this. This is this.
No,
this
it
is
has
this,
no
that.
attributes, but it's still very intimate, and it's the most intimate experience you have, and you have had it all your life.
Yeah.
But still, it took very long time for me to identify it. It's this. It's so.
And you'll find that once you start doing this, you will lose it a million times. You will find it and you hold on to it. And it's like, yeah, this is it. Bam. 2 seconds later, you lose it and you're back to the everyday thoughts again.
You never actually lose it. I mean, it's not like you are going anywhere.
No, it's the awareness of
it's awareness of yourself. And the thing is, you don't really have to hold it because that's grabbing something, but you're already there. So you just have to sit in yourself, abide in yourself. So it's not a holding really either. It's just sitting, being aware. But as soon as you start to try to hold it, it's that mind trying to grab an object. But you're not really an object. You're just this undescribable awareness.
Pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. And it's the most familiar thing because you've always been aware that you exist. And that's it. That's what you have to sit in. But your mind will try to focus to feelings, the body, and that's okay. But it's really not about that. You need to identify what's always been there throughout my whole life. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's easy to talk about, but I know it can be very confusing.
What I found challenging though is when you think about this, that you should just abide in the self.
Yeah.
But the mind, when it looks at like Ramana Maharshi, just his sheer presence, his stature, and everything he radiated, you start to make the assumption that when I found the self, it will be like that.
Yeah.
So you're constantly looking for something like it should be this or that, which I think is a mistake because once you start doing that, start comparing it to something else, you will lose it.
Yeah.
I just remembered I had a couple of weeks back. I had an experience with the self-inquiry. This gap meditation I tried out
in the morning.
It's supposed to be in the morning, but I did it in the evening.
Okay.
I went to bed early and couldn't sleep, but I had to be in bed. So I was just listening to Robert's meditation, where he basically said that you should find yourself in the gap.
Yeah.
Before, look what's there when you're not going into the thoughts, like between the thoughts, what's there, and that's the self. Then you're just abiding in the self. So I was just lying there, and what happened first was that just a wave of bliss started coming over me. The more I just found myself in the gap, the more bliss would just pour into my body.
Yeah.
So I was just lying there in bliss. But I didn't. This has happened before, that you start feeling this enormous bliss and so forth. But then I just hold on to the bliss and started down. Oh, this is so cool! Like the bliss. I love the bliss. But this time I just observed the bliss as well.
And stayed in itself.
Yeah, and it was like if I found myself in the center where I am now, it was like I was pulled back. Like I was going behind myself and just observing everything that was happening within me. And it was interesting to see that the thoughts, they were just so separated from where I was standing at this point.
Yeah.
So it was just the thoughts were just clouds
Yeah, I
moving
like that
past and
metaphor.
by.
That's like clouds passing by.
Yeah. So I can see like say that my thoughts are clouds right now, but I don't really feel it.
Yeah.
I can sense it in some way, but it's when I was back here, it was so obvious that it was just clouds floating about me,
Yeah.
and they just came and went and came and went, and I didn't identify them. Yeah, identify myself with them.
Yeah.
But then the more I stayed in this, something more happened as well. Was that I disconnected completely with my body.
Yeah.
And the body kept doing whatever it was supposed to do. Like I could feel like my arm moving. It was quite an interesting experience because I didn't have the sensation that I was moving. Like if I move my hand like this, I didn't have the sensation that it was I that was doing it. It just happened. So I was back here while my body was doing all these kind of things. And it was quite a cool experience. And that's when I lost it. Because then I was too overwhelmed by everything that was happening. But it was interesting to see like all the things that I have talked about and get a first-hand experience of it. Obviously, I'm not like in that state right now, but just to have a glimpse of it was quite a cool experience.
Yeah, and the more glimpses you have, the easier it will become gradually to come back to that state and abide in it. Because as I interpret it, I have also had similar experiences and I like to, for me, it's like the metaphor of being the eye in the tornado, in the storm, the eye of the storm, where you're like in the middle, absolutely still. Because when you go back there, nothing moves. You are completely stillness. But around you, in all directions, not just in the front, but also in the back and around, you have all these sensational thoughts and the body and everything. But where you are, the eye is completely still. That's the center, just observing everything happening. And as you said, when you move back or into this center, it's like the body's there, but it's not really you. You're just observing the world doing its business, but it's not really you doing it. It's just.
But I think if I relate to my experience where I like moved past the cloud, moved the thoughts, the body, I didn't have the feeling like the oneness feeling. It still like felt like a separation.
Yeah.
So there's another step to it where you, I imagine, merge with everything and become the oneness.
As Ramana puts it, that when you abide in the self, in the witness, eventually when you've done that for some time, it will collapse into the self. And as I understand it, and I have had glimpses of this on psychedelics basically, and a few times when I meditated as well, where you this is like threefold. You have the experience, which we usually have attention on, and now we switch our attention back to the witness. But this is still a dualistic construction, and we're still caught in the illusion, so to speak, that when we switch back to the witness, we realize, okay, there's this storm happening around me, but I'm actually just a witness. But then we have this third state where you collapse down into, and this can only, as I understand it, happen from the standpoint of the witness. When we're too caught in the experience, it's not going to happen, most likely. But when we move back to the witness, because having attention on the witness, it cannot really survive without being identified with experiences. So it will eventually collapse. And the third state, the oneness state, the true self, is when the witness and the experience become one. You are your experience, the totality of it. And that's not so. What we have experienced, as my interpretation is, we have managed to go back to the witness and sit there, and started to have sensation of bliss and so forth. And during psychedelics, I have a few glimpses of what it's like when you collapse into oneness and you are your experience. But it's not a. It's only been glimpses of it.
Yeah, I think like the main difference when you have like a glimpse of it is that you're not really aware like fully that it's happening and how it's all happening. You're getting just a glimpse.
And I think most people who wake up, like Ramana and Robert Adams and Papaji and all of these, it started with glimpses. And I actually think when I don't know, I didn't meet Ramana, but as I have read, it took some time for him to be established in the self. That he had this experience when he thought he was going to die, when he saw the real self. But then he went to Arunachala, and I think that he had described in somewhere in some book that he one night snuck into a temple, and it was this Shivalingam, kind of a stone deity there. Shivaites, those who devote themselves to the god of Shiva. It was this Shiva lingam in a temple, and you're not supposed to go up to it. But he snuck in there and touched the Shiva lingam, and then he felt like it was completed. He was established in the self. And the same thing with Robert Adams. I think he had his awakening back in the U.S. when he was a kid, teenager, and it wasn't until he met Ramana that he was established in the self. And I think he stayed in India for 17 years.
Traveling around just, I think from his story is like he had this, he noticed that he had this gift of like everything he asked for, he received. So if he wanted an apple would appear to him. If he wanted money, he would find the money in his pocket. And then one day he basically said, God. And God appeared to him, and then he went to India, met Ramana, and I think he had the full experience there with Ramana. Then he traveled. I think he, from instruction from Ramana, traveled around India just to basically get words to what he was experiencing. I think that was something he said himself, that
and
that was just a
understand
teaching
it completely. And that's, I think, where the guru is very important, where you have had this experience, but it's not established in you. And as Robert said, Ramana established the experience of God. I mean, and God and the self are synonymous in this teaching. And that's also, I would like to add that the story of Papaji, another guru that is quite famous among Westerners. And he was also a devotee to Ramana. He had, before he met Ramana, he had many, many experiences of God. But it was like this dualistic experience where he was Papaji and he was experiencing, I think it was the god Krishna. And he was completely happy with that, and he thought, I found it. And then he met Ramana, who said, yeah, but who is experiencing Krishna? I mean, go deeper, go into the self. And Ramana showed him this another level where the experiencer and the experience merge into one, and that's the highest state. So, and I know Buddhist teachers often warn students that don't fall for the experiences, the bliss, and just lay there and want to experience bliss because it's so nice to have these experiences. But it's not full enlightenment. You need to go deeper, find out who is experiencing the bliss.
Yeah, and I think also if it can have its advantages of experiencing the bliss first, because a lot of people, I think, are trying to like shoot too much in the beginning, like they are going for the end goal. It's much easier if you're established in bliss, like or you're like Papaji, and then proceed towards going deeper. So I think it has its purpose as well to just have this phase where you go through the bliss.
And
if that's what you desire, of course.
And I think that what will happen for most people anyways is that they will notice after some time that the bliss will come and go. And most likely they will become, like bliss junkies, searching for the bliss all the time. But at some point they will get tired of that and realize, okay, I'm not established in this. There's something more to this. And then they eventually will turn deeper and perhaps find a teacher that can guide them. But actually, the teaching of self-inquiry is ask yourself who is experiencing the bliss.
Yeah.
Go there.
And I
Always
think
go there.
I think what Ramana said to Papaji, like all the practice that he had done prior to meeting Ramana was like he's doing his japa, his mantras and all that, and experiencing all this bliss. And Ramana's response to that was like, yeah, you did that just to get here.
Yeah.
Now you're here. Now we can start the journey.
Exactly. I think Ramana said that practicing, regular meditation on the breathing is very good for you to develop the ability to point in the, you can point your attention to, but you sooner or later you will have to turn towards yourself. In the previous episode, the second interview with Arjun Brueggemann, if you have listened to that, he talked about an experience with Swami Vimalananda, the head of the Divine Life Society, which we have met actually the last year when we went to India. But Arjun talked about an experience with Swami Vimalananda where he said, you must ask yourself who you are. So, and in the Divine Life Society, and the founder of Divine Life Society, the guru Swami Sivananda, they were teaching a lot of practices like meditation, yoga, bhakti, kirtan, all of that. But what Swami Vimalananda said that, but in the end, after all the practice, you need to turn that and ask, who am I? So even in all traditions, I think it all leads up to self-inquiry in the end.
And I think that's why Ramana said that this is the most effective one, because you're going to directly to the end goal, like the source of
it's a direct
yourself.
Path.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also think that Ramana said that for some people, for many people, it might be hard to start practicing self-inquiry directly, because it's not an easy. In theory, it's really easy, but it's, as we said, actually finding the I thought is not that easy, because the mind is so accustomed to pointed awareness on objects. So it might be helpful to train on focus on the breath or something else.
And I just remember reading in the True Happiness book, which is the teachings of Ramana. There wasn't a devotee or person who came to his ashram to Ramana and asked like, I've tried this now for 20 years. And I still haven't realized the self. And Ramana's response was like, try 20 more. So it can be like, you shouldn't have any expectation that once you started doing this practice, it will take a week. And then I realized it all depends on your past karma and everything, like how much time you need and what will happen. That's up to God.
But it's a really powerful technique. I personally use it every day, along with other techniques as well. But it's one of my main practices, and you can actually do it in everyday life as well, as often as you can when you're taking a walk, or just move your attention towards yourself while you're doing the dishes and let the body take care of itself.
I mean, once you're like doing the dishes, taking a shower, like if you're in the shower, who's feeling like the sensation of the body, who's feeling the water, you can always go back to that, who am I, which I think is a wonderful technique that you can always have it with you.
And the more you do it, the easier it becomes to abide in the I thought, the illusory self at this point. but it's still very nice, because when you do that, sometimes I just sit in a chair and look out and it's really because when you turn the attention towards the self, you go into this quietness. It's very still, and of course, thoughts will come and go, but it's like you say, it's more like clouds passing by, and sometimes you get caught up in them, and then you remember, oh yeah, right, back to the self. But it's a practice.
Yeah, and it's a good one. It's a comforting one, and it's as you said, just like sitting in. I think that was exactly what Nasagarata did. He did it perhaps. I think it said something like 12 hours per day for 3 years or whatever.
The
Just
hardcore guy.
yeah,
Nice.
just sitting there. So I mean, if you want results, you need to put in the
Yeah.
efforts.
And I think Ramana often talked about, you know, you should do this practice quite intensely and really just go back, go back, go back.
And it's
Yeah.
it's interesting to read about Anamali Swami as well. Because that was one of Ramana's main devotees, or one of his biggest devotees. And I think for like now, let's say it was 10 years or 20 years when he stayed with Ramana, Ramana would constantly each day like have him work like tremendous work hours. I don't know if he worked like 16 hours per day or 14 hours per day, just working on the ashram, not doing any meditation, not doing anything, like just put him to work. And he just, yes, Ramana, yes, Ramana, yes, Ramana. And they did it for, I think it was several years. I don't remember how many. Then one day, basically, Ramana said, okay, now you're ready. Like now you have taken care of your past karma. Now leave the ashram, sit in meditation, and eventually he did the inquiry and he realized the self.
Yeah, and in a way, all those years of just working, he was actually surrendering his self and doing selfless service, which is actually a spiritual practice. Also, even though it might not look at it, surrendering yourself to your guru over day after day after day is actually giving up the idea of yourself.
And I think that's something that can be relatable for everyone. I mean, we're constantly here, and it feels like we're in this world. We're constantly doing things, but we're never making any progress. If you have that feeling, it's comforting to know that it's something always happening. The guru always has a plan for you. You're constantly moving forward, even when you don't see it. It's the guru's plan that's just being executed. And when the time is ready, it will be ready.
So we'll wait and see what happens,
Yeah.
basically.
It will be good.
Yeah, but I mean, for a long time, I was like, you know, chasing and really, but more and more when you do the practice, the more relaxed, you gradually become more relaxed, and you trust, you build up faith and trust in God, basically, and the guru, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think both Robert and Ramana said that like the next best thing you can do if you don't do the self-inquiry, if you don't manage to do that, the next best thing you can do is surrender. Like have complete surrender. Like just take life as, okay, this happened, okay, all right, I trust that it's for the greater good. Everything that happens, just surrender.
Give all your problems to God. Take this.
So,
but a total surrender is not easy as well.
No, and it takes time as well. So, or not, depending on who you are.
Yeah, I mean, there are spontaneous awakenings like Ramana Maharshi or Eckhart Tolle in modern times, who also had a spontaneous. But for most people, spiritual practice is recommended, I guess.
I think so too. Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's pretty much it when it comes to self-inquiry, at least from what we understand so far about it.
I hope you could take some good bits and pieces out of this conversation, and it will help you on your own practice, with your own practice.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback or anything, just leave a comment below, and we'll love to hear what you think about all this. And if you use self-inquiry, so please let us know.
Yeah, and you can visit our website, where we have tons of more information. We have articles and books and other videos as well about different topics.
All right. So I think that's it. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.